Welcome to this Unhelix digital session, What Makes the Best Ecosystem for Developing MedTech Products. I'm Aline Charpentier, Head of Innovation Support at One Nucleus, and I am delighted to be joined today by three MedTech experts from both sides of the Atlantic to discuss their views on the key enablers for MedTech products development and the role the ecosystem play in supporting their companies on one hand, but also the adoption of their technologies for obviously ultimately the patient's benefits. So as a traditional discussion kickoff, I will ask each panelist if they could introduce themselves, their organization, obviously, and maybe to say a few words about the ecosystem they represent or they are embedded in. So if I may start with you, Bill, that would be really good.
Sure, thank you very much. I'm Bill Carpou. I'm the CEO of OCTANE. We're located in Southern California, in Orange County, which is halfway between San Diego and Los Angeles. OCTANE has been in existence since 2002. Our focus is MedTech and pure technology. So, companies that we work with need to fit into one of those two categories. On the MedTech side, a strong focus on device and pharma, more so than just healthcare IT. Our organization has four components. The first is what we refer to as OCTANE Connect. It's where our content and our events and programming is stored. The second is our community impact component, which houses our accelerator launchpad, and we work with about 50 companies a year. And the third and fourth are our OCTANE Enterprise Solutions group, which matches up capital and then growth resources for these companies to grow. To your point, I mean, just one of the things that we look at, and we call them our imperatives, from a Southern California perspective, for a strong ecosystem. And the first is quality innovation and ideas. High quality entrepreneurs, educational institutions, of the likes. Two is obviously access to capital, whether it's institutional or private. The third is a strong infrastructure of incubators, accelerators, lab space. The fourth is really community engagement. The larger companies, in the U.S., we would refer to as state and local government, community leadership. The fifth is growth resources. So, what we try and look at here is, how do we take an idea, get it funded, and then grow it into something that's substantial? And then our multiple centers of gravity, but places that people could go. So, we're fortunate in being in a good location here in Southern California, and look forward to contributing today.
Thank you, Bill. And it's really good to have your perspective and so to compare that with others in the panel on this side of the Atlantic. Joze, if I could continue with you to say a few words about your company and where you're based, would be good.
Well, first, I work for Gondola-Medical Technologies. I'm an associate and partner as well, and chief strategy officer. At Gondola, we have a therapy for neurological disorders and to improve walking and balance on patients, mainly stroke and Parkinson. The company has been founded 10 years ago in another location, and the last 2 years ago we decided to move to Lausanne, to what is called the Health Valley, and mainly for I would say the strength of really the ecosystem. First, there is a lot of skills in the region. We have EMEA headquarters for Medtronic, but as well other very big MedTech companies. We have as well very good universities with, I would say, a lot of new ideas and innovation. And we have as well a very strong support from the federal state, but as well the local state. And the local state is really, really pushing and helping a lot MedTech companies, as they have, I would say, an investment policy and a contribution policy with grants and I would say possibility to have advisors and consultants for almost free for companies in order to really grow craft strategy and improve. And this, I think, it's basically the main assets of the Health Valley. I would say in terms of weaknesses, because I need to speak of weaknesses as well, somehow, I think that in terms of funding, it's very different than in the United States or other parts, I would say, in Europe, but mainly US.
Thanks. Very good to hear the story of a transition from one ecosystem to another, to compare the positives of it. And I'm looking forward to discussing that. Phil, if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you. Yeah. So my name is Phil Shelton. So I'm one of the commercial leads in the commercial team at Eastern Academic Health Science Network. So we are one of 15 academic health science networks, which are spread geographically across England, and we are best described as the innovation arm of the NHS. We were strategically set up to, rather than innovation getting into practice, rather than that just happening by diffusion, we were mandated and brought into existence to try and speed that up. So we cover quite a few different areas, really. So we're based in just south of Cambridge. So we're very fortunate in the fact that we've got a very a rich ecosystem of incubators, accelerators, innovation. We've got Cambridge University, and 3 major hospital trusts as well in our area. So we've compared to some of the other AHSNs, we're very fortunate in that fact. And what we do is we work very closely with innovators. Innovators come to us and we help them on their journey, and it could be through funding. So we work with grant organizations in our patch, with accelerators, with venture capital. And we also help them with all the aspects of their journey into commercialization. So that could be procurement, for example, or regulatory. So we have experts that we can work with there, and other organizations in our area as well that we work in a very close sort of network with. So yeah, so we sit centrally, and we have a very nice position in the east of England in terms of our network with public health, with the health services, with enterprise organizations and investors as well, so we can rapidly mobilize support for innovators that come to us. And then ultimately, the ultimate aim would be to find one or more innovators in our area who are matched up very nicely with requirements for the NHS, and we can help them grow and actually spread them across the whole of the AHSN network. So we have a delivery part of our organization. So those innovations which are particularly beneficial to patients nationally are then mandated to be delivered through what's called our delivery arm at the AHSN. So we have a number of things like, for example, rapid uptake programs and devices which are spread out. So we have that incubator, progressive part with innovators, and also the delivery arm,
which is covering pretty much all these areas of ecosystem that we discussed before. Thank you for the introduction. So if I hear you all, an ecosystem in MedTech, that's a broad summary would be having really good access to talent, both for innovation and also commercial development, access to funding, obviously, access to infrastructure, but also access to potential development, so growth, strategic development, or route to markets, like, for example, the AHSN is doing with the NHS in England. So a perfect ecosystem would have all these components laid down, but because perfection probably doesn't exist, well, which component would you pick as the most important to you, the most crucial? And if I start with you, Jose, maybe what was the one that attracted you the most to where you are based now?
Well, it's clearly to find skills that were missing in the company. This is clearly the case. Skills not only in terms of employees, but as well advisors, entrepreneurs that already did exits, and really to cover a broad range of skills. And this was clearly the main goal, and which was very good because it's what we cover mainly here in the region. Other aspects can be covered overseas or in other places, but this needs to be really very local, which is the case with the Health Valley, with a lot of companies and a lot of entrepreneurs that already went through an exit, or very big corporates, very experienced senior managers that can really contribute to the strategy of a young company.
Yeah, so it's really around this talent element, commercial and technology. And maybe questions for the other than that. How do you nurture this talent pool? It's good to have it, but how do you recycle it? How do you enable to grow and to evolve as well? Because to me, MedTech is a very broad convergent space. So it encompasses many technologies and evolving very rapidly. So is there any incentives, programs? Is it connection with academia? I don't know, Phil or Bill, if you have any insights on that.
Well, I think the universities obviously create and build engineering talent, computer science talent, bioscience talent. But I think one of the things that we see is entrepreneurs that have been successful and done this, and there's a recycling of talent that has been through it. That's probably the most valuable talent. And I think the third component of that is, we see some of the bigger companies that are located here. I don't want to say that they encourage their people to leave and start businesses, but they don't prevent it. And at the end of the day, they understand that that's part of an ecosystem. And so, we've seen many companies that have gotten formulated by mid-level managers, or even senior managers for that standpoint, leaving some of the bigger companies and taking those 15, 20 years of expertise and relationships and building a business around that ultimately the bigger company may fund, may acquire, and it seems like it's a closed loop in terms of that, building this talent pool.
Is there a role for you to keep that glue, as you said, going, or is it pretty self-sustainable in what you're describing?
It's
what's
not
the magic trick here?
yeah, it's not as self-sustainable as we'd like it to be. So the role that we could play is, we create the settings, the environments, and the opportunity for all these individuals to converge. And obviously it's been much more difficult in the past year doing that, based upon the lack of in-person, and we're seeing that starting to roar back right now. But it's not organic. I think there's some areas that it might be more organic. Silicon Valley, maybe even a Boston from that standpoint. It's not quite as organic here in Southern California, but we've actually got a greater talent pool. So maybe it's because it's bigger, it's more difficult to build it organically, but it's coming along very well.
Yeah, and I think, as I say, it's just to keep an eye on the way it's evolving and on which aspect you have to intervene, or the one that you have to let going. And talking about great talent pool and how to intervene, Phil, what about in situation in Cambridge, which I know of, and sorry, I'm chipping in on that, but I'd be really curious to know if there are anything around this conversion work, because obviously it's a great talent pool. This question about bringing the different disciplines together has always been on the table, and I'd be curious to see your view on that.
Yeah, great. So I think I've been with the organization just over a year now, and I think what I've seen is the power of some of the programs that have been set up really to bring people together. So for example, we have the Clinical Entrepreneurs Program, which is set up by the NHS, and that's just been moved over where it's going to be centered at Anglia Ruskin University, which is actually pretty close. It's in our patch, actually. It's one of the universities. And this is great. So we get a number of innovators with their innovations come through Eastern Academic Health Science Network, who are clinicians and have got an idea. And we've got one, for example, at the moment, who's it's an incredible sort of passion that he's got for his patients. He's an orthopedic surgeon, just finished his last set of exams, taking a year out, and he had a real passion for seeing his patients successfully moved out from surgery and into the community. So this whole idea of community care that he had a real passion for, that whole pathway. So he set up a company called Care Compare, which is all around trying to match up and actually get patients better care and more systematized. So there's a real gap in the market there. So incredible. He's met up with an engineer, a software engineer from Cambridge as well. So that's been a really powerful example there. Really, we also have the NHS Innovation Accelerator Program as well. So I was on a call for that yesterday, and we've got a new cohort of companies coming through there. So these are really quite exciting innovations, which potentially might bubble up with that sort of accelerator support to become some of the new national programs that get rolled out. But there's also a number of other organizations where people can meet and actually various networks within the region where people can come and meet with ideas and sort of come up with companies and ideas. So it is really rich. I think some of these programs that I mentioned are really powerful. We also have a Scale-Up Academy, which has been really good. There's a company called Carrillo, which are based in Cambridge. This is an ex-Cambridge graduate who's did a lot of analysis on over 3,000 companies to look at the vectors involved in scale up. So again, we've managed to work with them very closely and put a number of companies through that program. We've seen some of them really fly through there, and and one recently just managed to get a huge amount of venture capital to help expand their business. So I think these particular programs and kind of setups are really powerful, and we see, because they continue, innovators recycling through there, and those programs infecting other people as they hear sort of stories and see the journeys that other people have been on. So it really does inspire others to get involved.
Yeah, so it's about seeding it and then nurturing, and then eventually that gets there. And I guess something else that is really cyclic like that of recycling is also the funding.
Yeah.
So it's seeing successful entrepreneur who then are sort of reinvesting back into the community. And that's one of these ecosystem enablers that I wanted to touch base on is obviously the access to funding, to investment. So I think this is very powerful, the cycling back the money of the successful entrepreneurs into potential new investment. But I suspect you can't be just self-sustainable within your own ecosystem. So it's also accessing the global investors. So how this balance plays in your own regions between local and versus global investors. Anyone want to crack on with this one?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, when you asked the question before, what's the most important point? I think there's many, and I think it's almost it's not a trick question, but it's kind of where you are in your journey. I mean, at a point in time, if you don't have capital, I'd kind of argue that access to capital is the most important, because you just can't proceed without it. Once you have it, there's growth resources that are more important to build your business. But getting back to capital, because that's really the focus of our accelerator, is that what we found is that there's actually not enough capital that's headquartered in Southern California for the type of innovation that's occurring here. In fact, from a data set standpoint, only about 13% of the capital required to fund early stage startups in Southern California that are created in Southern California exists here. So it's incumbent for the entrepreneur and for us to help them in the role that we play to reach out to other money centers. And I'll just talk about the U.S. for a moment, whether it's New York or Boston or Denver, a couple of key areas, and help those entrepreneurs get funding. So we see a lot of funding coming into Southern California from other regions. One of the other items that we're I guess blessed with is that as expensive as Southern California is, it's still a bargain compared to the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. So from an investor perspective, they find themselves investing in a company at a more favorable valuation in Southern California versus if that company were in the same stage of development with the same product, the same revenue or non-revenue, but just situated in a much higher cost area, such as Northern California. So I think it's imperative for any ecosystem to be able to reach well beyond their geographical boundaries and pull capital in.
But then it's how you're making this case, or you should invest in Southern California rather than other regions. And that's why I wonder what's the role of the ecosystem in that, this balance between nurturing this circular economy as well as reaching out global and becoming a sort of inward investment advocate, if you want. I think you said it. And so is it something you're looking at as well in the East of England, Phil, or is it a bit more inward looking in terms of recycling the investment?
Yeah, so one of our big aims is to try and bring investment into the east of England. So we would love to see sort of job growth, job creation, investment, inward investment. However, we tend to work sort of at the sort of earlier stage with companies. So, for example, with, as I mentioned earlier, the clinical entrepreneurs, companies that are sort of at an earlier stage. And we have a few examples where we start to see some of that growth coming through, and some of those, for example, go through what's called our Scale Up Academy, and we've been on that journey with them to help them and be with them as they've raised some capital at that stage. So a lot of our work is really around the kind of funding streams that go through. So one of the big ones is the National Institutes for Health Research funding program. So they have a whole range of different funding streams where entrepreneurs and where companies can dip into at different stages of their company growth. And it's really powerful, actually. So they have, for example, program grants. They have something called I4I, which is innovation for invention, which is all around MedTech. And some of those pots of money can be hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds, actually. So they have like £1 billion budget for the NIHR. So we work very closely with them on what's called the Research and Design Service. So they have they have a number of advisors that can sit and work with companies, and in fact, what we've just done is set up some regular meetings, some workshops for companies to come along, entrepreneurs, to sort of really look at their landscape. One of the other big funders as well is NHSX on AI. So they've recently had a number of very high-profile AI programs, again with millions of pounds involved. So we've been working very closely with innovators to really tap into that. So we have some good expertise in grant writing, but we also link in with seed investors as well in our patch, and also with the accelerators as well. So there's a number of accelerators in Cambridge, and we tend to work mainly at that stage. So we're kind of pretty well versed in our patch in that area. And yeah, and the other thing we do is we're doing quite a bit of work with another investment group which invest in have a large portfolio of Israeli companies. So we're working very closely with them, which is really quite exciting, actually. And using that relationship, that international relationship, to try and bring some of those companies into the UK. And there's some very exciting technology that we're seeing there, and working closely with them in terms of that. And that's a two-way thing as well. As we see some companies, we can actually introduce them to this investment group and this vehicle. And they've definitely been looking at some of the companies that we've been working with.
Yeah, very interesting. And yeah, and as you say, if you're looking more at the earlier stage, your local ecosystem can probably cater for that, whether it's early stage VCs or some angels. Yeah. It's when you're looking really at growing and going to international markets that you're going to OCTANE's phase of growth of, yes, you need further capital to be brought in. And so you need to think about that. Jose, I had a feeling you were sitting a bit in that middle. So you went through the early stage, you're pretty successful commercializing in Switzerland, France, if I understand, and now looking at other markets. So going for this, raising more money. How this ecosystem you're in is helping with that, or is supporting this aspect?
Well, it's I think, as has been mentioned as well by Philip, I think here there is a lot of initiatives and accelerators, grants from the states, and to really foster very early stage companies. The issue, I would say, comes after a couple of years, once you have a product and you want really to develop faster the company, that really the issues start. And it's really an issue that we have at Swiss level, and that we still, I would think, do not solve, because the issue is, I think we have more very good companies to finance than really risk takers, people and funds that really want to finance them. Luckily today, and I think it's one of the good points of the pandemic, if we have to find really advantages, is that we can fundraise abroad as well. And there are as well some companies at our stage that have been able to be funded by US funds because they were going to develop in the US without any presence. Because usually before, you already should have a subsidiary there, some operations and so on. But now even the funds in the US, they start looking at companies in Switzerland and in the region in particular. But I would say, yes, when you are in the middle, in what we call here this Death Valley, where you have really to find funds, it's really very difficult, and you need to go abroad. You need to be really to look 360 degrees to find investors, and not only rely on investors in the region, because there are a lot of initiatives, not only in MedTech, but as well in other industries. In MedTech today, what we face as well is a big competition of digital health. And we see a lot of funds that only invest in digital health, and they stop investing in MedTech. Because there is this hype with digital, a lot of companies have been successful. I would say there was a trade sale to a very big pharma company, and now there is a lot of money running to this kind of companies, even if they have no revenue model. It looks like a bit like the dot-com bubble early in the 2000s.
Interesting. I always put digital health within the very broad spectrum of MedTech. So it's interesting to hear that some people would spice that. And is it because it's not a product, so you don't have the whole manufacturing concerns, etc., and so the business model sounds easier, you think? That they're more attracted to digital?
All the reimbursement path, all the go-to-market to customer that can be medical professionals or patients, that it's completely different. It's really easy. And of course, in terms of scaling up, it's easiest to scale up with a digital than really with a product like our product that is, I would say, that still has a size, and it's not so easy, that you need to configure per patient and personalize it. But clearly, I would say that digital for me, it's out of MedTech, because it's really completely a different scheme.
Okay.
I would tend to agree with that too. I mean, I think we look at it in very much the same fashion. You know, device, pharma, biotech are clearly MedTech, and you know, healthcare IT and all of that straddles, you know, a different universe. And in the US, we have obviously FDA, and you know, you have your own regulations in Europe and everything. And you know, so we tend to look at MedTech on the items that really require that type of regulatory and regulation bylaws.
And if I can, excuse me, Bill, but if I can even elaborate further, in Europe this year we changed the regulation law for MedTech. We were under MDD, we went through MDR. It's a new regulation. Before it was way easier than in US to register a product. Now it's really, before launching the company, you really need to think, where do you want to launch it, in the US or here in Europe? And most of the time the answer is quite obvious, that it's not here.
And you know, I think the other thing to this point is it takes a whole lot less capital. I think that was your point, Jose, to bring a healthcare IT company versus a device or pharma company. I mean, you might be talking 1/10 the amount of capital required to bring that type of company to market, and there's a pretty quick stream of revenue that you can get. So
yeah, I guess I was seeing it as on this market access angle, because ultimately you're selling to a healthcare system. But maybe for digital, you also have a sort of personal market that you don't have within MedTech. So that's a bit different. Yeah, I was just intrigued because there are obvious convergence between the two. So I can see how they separate, but still you can't, as an ecosystem, ignore fully the digital part, because that may be embedded within MedTech. But sorry, diverting on the digital thing. Actually, the point you made, Jose, about this market access, I wanted to extrapolate a little bit for the time that we have left, because I think it's a very important one. And I'd like to hear what ecosystems role within that. So obviously you're developing a MedTech product, you need to think about where to sell it. As you said, if you're European based or US based, it's yes, US versus Europe. And I was curious to know how much the location of your ecosystem weighed into your decision to go for a market or another. In other words, it's good to be close to your potential markets. You're here in the UK, selling to the NHS is an obvious one, but also how much expectation do you have from your ecosystem to enable you to go to the US market or others? Do you want to comment a bit on that? Because again, I'm taking you as an example, you're based somewhere and you're looking at other markets,
Yes, well, today we are selling the Gondola home devices in North Italy, Switzerland, and France, but really at tiny scale. We can say that it's more a pilot than really a strategy go-to-market, smart tactics for the moment, as we are not reimbursed. And but I would say that it has been key for us to really understand the patient pathway and who owns the patient and what is the interest of who owns the patient to really, I would say, foster other kinds of therapies. And what we realized really is that in Europe, the attitude of the physician and neurologist is very different than in the US. For us, we started working with Mount Sinai a couple of months ago. It has been very fast and very easy to start a collaboration with them, to start producing research, and even speaking about commercialization here in Europe. Once you're not if you are not reimbursed, and as you are, I would say, a first of kind and not what they are used to see, it's very difficult for neurologists. They are very conservative. They do not need to fight for patients, and this, I think, and fight for new therapies, which is a bit different in the US. And really, we see a very different attitude between Europe and USA. I think that if now we would start the company from scratch, I think we will go very fast to the US and not really, I would say, commercialize a lot around European area.
And we would welcome you in Southern California.
We'd love to.
There you go.
And the big difference as well, excuse me, just to finish, is patients associations. There are a tremendous force to convince FDA, because thanks to them, we have been enrolled in the Breakthrough Device program, and really to reach patients and neurologists. They're really doing an amazing job to promote new therapies. Here, patients associations are a bit, I would say, clubs of healthcare, but not really trying to push for new therapies, push for new research, and really push for having patients doing better. It's really a slight different framework in US. I don't mean that in US it's better than in Europe, but it's really very different, and in our case, it makes a huge difference.
It may just be a bit more matured and professionalized in the US. Maybe you have been sort of in between in the UK. And just I was coming back to the market access question. Actually, I'd be curious to hear Phil's view on that from what I'm hearing. So AHSN, strong support to selling to the NHS, which is a really strong first market, to be honest. It's a national system, so it's good to go there. But how is it perceived for you and the companies? Is it just an end goal, or is it a sort of first step to then going more global?
We tend to look at it in a fashion of saying the companies that we can help and come through our accelerator, should be headquartered or have a fairly strong presence in Southern California. One of the reasons is we have the network to be able to help them. Now, as they develop and build, what we try and underscore is California on its own is the 5th largest economy in the world. So, you could kind of look at it, say, insularly, a company should be able to grow in some substance before expanding, outside of that. But companies and CEOs always want to expand geography. What they want to, they want to jump over to the Asian markets and the Far East and Europe, and expand, domestically inside the U.S. But we try and keep it inside the U.S. until there's some scale. I think that makes sense, and it gets a bit more complicated if you don't have the revenue stream to support the expenses of expansion. And so, I think at the end of the day, it's more about expanding when you're ready to expand. Don't expand to grow revenue. And if you don't have a solid platform in where you already exist.
Yeah, and so the power of the ecosystem is to really strengthen this position locally, even if local is California, as you said. And yes,
yeah, and
get ready for the next step.
Yeah, I was just, maybe just adding on that, one of my initial comments was the role of some of these bigger companies in the area, and sometimes they become customers for the companies. So, it's really intriguing to start matching up a company, their technology and innovation with someone who could consume it, other than the end user. That's more localized and has a self-interest in that.
Makes sense. Phil, do you feel the same about the UK?
The UK is quite a quite a different beast, really. So we work with a number of companies from overseas, and the NHS is quite a hard nut to crack. So in a lot of markets, there's a very clear reimbursement sort of process. So for example, US, Australia, for example, we're working with companies with MedTech devices and even AI solutions where, for example, we have an AI solution which surfaces misfindings. So they will be paid for that in the US. So there's a clear procurement. Over in the UK, there's things called block contracts, which are already sort of established between commissioners and providers. So often solutions have to have a different slant. For example, it may have to be QA or patient safety, and then trying to create a value proposition around that, which is quite different to a simple surfacing and scanning and finding a reimbursement. So a lot of our companies, and if they're MedTech devices, for example, you have to try and find a key opinion leader, usually somebody who's quite a clinician, for example, who has a strong voice in a particular area, who might champion that particular device. They might use it in a private setting to start with, for example, where there's an easier procurement route. And then at some point, then to get enough interest to do what's called specialist commissioning. So you would then go to and find your local specialist commissioner to look at the evidence for your device or solution and say, actually, yeah, this is a step forwards, and actually then find some funding to fund the commissioning of that device. And that can be quite a long and tortuous route. And then you have to think about how to get your device or solution onto procurement, for example, frameworks, or onto category towers in the NHS. And again, that can be quite protracted. So once you get there, it can be pretty good and pretty powerful. And you have some great use cases, but it's definitely not as easy as some of the sort of healthcare ecosystems to get established and get to market. So yeah, the NHS can be quite a challenge. Joze, I don't know if have you tried to look at the NHS market at all with your product?
Yes, we tried. We met people from NHS and the innovation department.
Okay.
At a couple of congress, but unfortunately, once back to the UK, it was very difficult to get in touch back with them. Yeah. And really, as I mentioned before, as we are a very small company, we need to really choose our markets. And it's even very difficult because you know that in Europe, it looks like one country, but it's absolutely not. Every country has a very different system, and even in the country, there are different settings. And I think one of the most complex is Switzerland. We are so tiny, but we are very good in terms of putting things very difficult together and make it difficult. But yeah, we tried, but unfortunately, it has not been possible. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is the UK challenging yet rewarding when you get there, and actually that's why we have organizations like the HSN to support companies to access and crack that system. And actually what I'm hearing overall is you highlight some challenges of market access within Europe, whether it's the different individual countries or regions or the other. It doesn't prevent these regions to have really strong ecosystems in MedTech. So maybe coming back to the point of what are the main enablers, it may not be the main one. And maybe these questions around access to talent, access to funding, they're probably more relevant and more important. And when it comes to market access, it's just to define where you position yourself. And if you want to remain local, you accept the challenges, but then maybe that's the test bed to go to the next step. And the next step is when you're ready for that. But also coming back to Bill's comment on, you really want to get them ready for their own market. And then when getting bigger, it's another layer. would there be merits in having more sort of overarching collaborations between the different ecosystems? So, you know, your company's built, they're ready to go on the other market. So you need really strong connections with Asian countries or the UK or others. And so to create this sort of ecosystem of ecosystems, is that something that we may aim at? And next question is our current very digital world not allowing that a little bit better? What do you think, Bill?
You know, I think relationships with other ecosystems are really important, and you know, we look at that in the U.S. I mean, I mentioned New York and Boston before, but having good relationships there. You know, I think through some of the work that we've done in the UK, there's an entry path there that it just seems like it's an easier entry point for companies trying to come into Europe to come in through the UK, you know, from the US. So I think these global hubs of innovation need to have some form of interconnectivity.
And maybe to add a layer of a form of soft landing, because as we said, it's a sort of heavy structure, it's technical and it needs infrastructure. So you probably need some support with that.
Soft
so is this something you'd be, is there something you'd be welcoming from the UK or from Switzerland as well in Orange County?
Well, if I speak for Switzerland, here we have, I would say, a very strong connection with Boston, because of course it's 6 or 8 hours flight. We have a lot of connections with Boston ecosystem. We have lots of trips of entrepreneurs going to Boston and really strengthen the relationships with the area there. And as well, Switzerland built a network of scientific embassies that with a clear goal really to I would say, contribute to companies to enter in the US and to get in touch, not only with a go-to-market, but really with R&D, with production, with other type of skills. It's not only about really go-to-market, it's about really a complete strategy and what can be done complementary on different ecosystems.
And any direct connections between AHSN, for example, and other international hubs, or is it to be formed?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we are working more intensely and harder with the international trade sort of avenues and ecosystems. So for example, we work fairly closely with the Minnesota Trade Office. So that's definitely quite a good landing point for the UK. We also do quite a bit of work with Austrade. They're particularly sort of active, and we've got some really good links with them. So they do quite a bit of work where they can actually triage companies and sort of say, look, we think these particular companies are going to be interested in some sort of UK trade, and that can go both ways as well, which is good. Israeli trade government organization we worked with as well, and also with Kotra, which is the South Korean group as well. So we've been working with them more recently as well, and also with our own DIT, which is the Department of Industry and Trade. So they have quite a lot of export functions, and they have different representatives that cover different geographies across the globe. So we work quite closely with those groups and try and attend events and try and make that two-way as well, so we can actually introduce some of the companies that we're working with and also look at some of the import kind of opportunities there are as well. But we could do more, and we're sort of working harder and harder to try and build those links up and you know, make those more of a regular sort of cadence, so that we can actually build on those relationships and strengthen the opportunities there. So yeah, so that's kind of our main areas that we work with.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Well, thank you all. That was very interesting. Just as a rapid wrap up, we can't really ignore the last 16 months we've been in, and all having to work in a digital world. Could you tell me, just in very few words, one sentence, how do you feel this digital approach to work has evolved your ecosystem, if at all? Has it changed anything for good or not for good?
Are you talking to virtual, like for the past year?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, we we're going to bring people back to the office, but we're going to be a little bit looser in terms of you know, how we work and how smart we work. So yeah, I think it's taught us that we can have a bigger audience, a broader audience, to basically promote and provide our content and our thought leadership. And from an internal perspective, you know, you need to be in the office to collaborate. You need to be in the office to develop as an individual. But you know, there's other things, and so you know, I think it's gonna lend itself to flexibility and maybe more creativity.
So best of both worlds.
Hybrid.
Dude, sounds good to me. Phil, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think the virtual world has created a level playing field, actually. You know, so there's always that sense of, you know, those face-to-face meetings being really important. So we had a number of meetings where people would come across from the whole region to what's called our innovation and review panel, you know, taking huge amounts of time out and travel, etc. And they've all gone virtual. So I think that level playing field where everyone's on the same sort of page and in the same environments on Teams and Zoom pretty much all day has just shown, and I think Bill said really how productive that is and how broad, you know, your reach is. So you can be, you know, in one part of the UK and then you can be in Minnesota the next hour, and that time you save in travel, you know, it kind of makes me think, and I think a lot of my colleagues, I'd hate to get in the car now and have to travel, because that would be, you know, X number of hours out of my day, which is now filled with sort of more productive work. But I think it will return to a bit of both. I think, you know, it's really good sometimes to have face-to-face meetings. It can achieve sometimes that little bit extra that you can't achieve virtually. But I think just finding that balance, I think, will be the key, really. And again, as Bill said, I don't think we're going to be going back to how we were, but it's going to be definitely a hybrid version of what we've had. How hybrid, I don't know, but I quite like the virtual world. It works well.
Okay, I like the element of level play and leveling. Maybe it's democratizing as well the access for everything. So access to technology, access to funding for some companies. So I think at the ecosystem level, again, that's quite interesting to see that. Yeah, Jose, same. Do you think the virtual world has changed anything for the vibrant Lausanne MedTech ecosystem?
Well, I think that it's like my colleagues said, I think there is nothing so different in terms of, I think digital helps a lot, well, with flexibility, with being pragmatic. And now you think before going to the office, and really you need to find the right balance. And really it raises a lot of questions about leadership and how you can really foster leadership in a company. Because before it was absolutely clear to be in the office, because otherwise you are not productive, otherwise lots of things. But now we realize that there is a balance to find, and everyone has to find this balance, which is not so easy. But I think to be in the middle, it's quite good balance.
We agree. Extremes are never good. So thanks very much, everyone. Enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did too. And for you who are listening to that, there is plenty more on Helix on-demand content for you to watch on the platform. So I hope you enjoy the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.